Elizabeth's mother taught her 3 things before she died. How to make a bed so tight a quarter would bounce. How to smile with her eyes when her mouth wanted to scream. And how to be so quiet predators forget your prey. At the Onyx vault, the 3rd lesson kept her alive. Booth 1 belonged to Kang de-shik, the architect they called him, the man who built Chicago's underworld with bone and blueprint. 30 men had died for looking at him wrong. Elizabeth had served him for 3 years without meeting his eyes once. Then a glass shattered. Red wine bled across white marble. A rival's accident. Guns appeared like magic, safeties off, fingers twitching. Elizabeth didn't run. She stepped into the kill zone, caught Kang de-shik's wrist and said, "Hold still. You're ruining a $3,000 suit over $40 wine." The room froze. For the first time in a decade, the architect smiled. "What's your name?" he asked. She shouldn't have answered, but her mother had taught her 3 things. She'd never said anything about running from men who smiled like wolves. "Elizabeth?" His smile widened. "Elizabeth, you just made a terrible mistake." The guns lowered, but she knew. She knew what happened to people who broke the Onyx rule. They disappeared. If you want to know what happens when Elizabeth enters the architect's world, hit that like button and subscribe to Christy J's story. New chapters drop every day. Now let's continue. Elizabeth's shift ended at 2 a.m. She counted her tips in the back room. $217, enough for her brother's textbooks and 3 days of groceries. She pulled her coat tight and slipped out the service exit. Chicago in February was a knife to the ribs. The alley smelled like garbage and regret. Elizabeth kept her head down, keys between her fingers, the way her mother taught her. She made it 3 blocks. Then she heard the footsteps. Not running, walking, confident. She didn't turn, didn't speed up. Predators smell fear. "Elizabeth." His voice cut through the cold. She stopped. Kang de-shik stood under a flickering streetlight, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the air. No bodyguards, no guns, just him. "You're following me," she said. "I'm protecting you." "From what?" "From what comes next." Before she could answer, headlights exploded around the corner. A black SUV, no plates, windows tinted black. It wasn't slowing down. Kang de-shik grabbed her wrist and yanked her backward. The SUV screamed past, so close she felt the heat off the engine. Gunfire ripped through the air, not at them, at the building behind them. Brick exploded into dust. Elizabeth hit the pavement hard, Kang de-shik's body covering hers. The SUV disappeared into the night. Silence. Her ears rang, her hands shook. Kang de-shik pulled her to her feet. "You saved my life tonight," he said quietly. "Now everyone knows your face." Who were they? People who don't forgive mistakes. He looked at her, really looked. "You have 2 choices. Run and they'll find you in a week. Or come with me." "Come with you where?" "Somewhere they can't touch you." Elizabeth's chest tightened. "You mean a cage." "I mean alive." His eyes were dark, unreadable. "You broke the rule, Elizabeth. There's no going back." She thought about her brother, her apartment, her life. Small, safe, hers. "What if I run anyway?" Kang de-shik stepped closer. "Then I'll be at your funeral." The cold bit into her skin. She thought about her mother's lessons, how to smile when you want to scream, how to disappear. "Fine," she whispered, "but don't think this means I trust you." He almost smiled. Good. Trust gets people killed. The penthouse sat 70 floors above Chicago, wrapped in windows that turned the city into a glowing grid. Elizabeth stood in the center of it, arms crossed, taking it all in. Marble floors, a kitchen bigger than her apartment, a view that made her dizzy. It was beautiful. It was a trap. Kang Dashik poured himself a drink, Macallan 25, 2 fingers, and watched her from across the room. "You're angry," he said. "I'm tired." "You're angry." Elizabeth turned. "You dragged me out of my life, put me in a tower, and now I'm supposed to what? Say thank you? You're supposed to stay alive. By becoming your prisoner? By becoming invisible again." He set the glass down. "They saw your face, Elizabeth, but they don't know your name. They don't know where you live. Not yet. How long do I have? If you go back, 3 days, maybe 4. Her throat tightened. "And my brother?" "Marcus, 22, pre-med at UIC, lives in a studio on Halstead." Kang Dashik's voice was flat, factual. "He's safe. For now." Elizabeth's blood went cold. "You looked into him?" "I look into everything." "Stay away from him." "Then stay away from windows." Kang Dashik stepped closer. "You think I want you here? You're a liability, a loose thread. But you saved my life, so I'm saving yours. That's the deal." "I didn't agree to a deal." "You did when you said my name." Elizabeth's jaw clenched. She wanted to scream, to run, to hit him. Instead, she smiled, the way her mother taught her. "Fine, I'll stay. But don't mistake me for someone who belongs to you." Kang Dashik studied her, something flickering behind his eyes. Respect, maybe, or warning. "You don't belong to me, Elizabeth." He picked up his glass. "But you're in my world now." He walked toward the hallway. "There's a bedroom down the hall. Bathroom stocked. Don't open the 3rd door on the left." "Why not?" He paused. "Because I didn't give you permission." Then he was gone. Elizabeth stood alone in the glass tower, surrounded by a city that wanted her dead. She thought about her mother, about being quiet, about survival. Then she walked to the 3rd door and turned the handle. 3 days passed. Elizabeth learned the rhythms of the glass tower. Kang Dashik left every morning at dawn, returned after midnight. Never said where he went. She didn't ask. But on the 4th night he came home early, with pizza. "Deep dish," he said, setting the box on the counter. "Lou Malnati's. You're from Chicago. You have opinions." Elizabeth stared. "You brought me pizza? You haven't eaten today. How do you know?" "I know everything." He opened the box. "Now sit." She shouldn't have, but the smell was intoxicating. They ate in silence at first. Then, "Why do you do this?" Elizabeth asked. "Do what?" "This," she gestured around. "The empire, the control, the fear." Kang Dashik wiped his hand slowly. "Because fear is predictable. Loyalty isn't. That's a sad way to live. It's a safe way to live." "Is it?" Elizabeth leaned forward. "You're surrounded by people who die for you. But would any of them sit with you and eat pizza?" He didn't answer. "That's what I thought." "You don't know me, Elizabeth. I know you're scared." His eyes snapped to hers. "Dangerous." "I'm not." "You are. You're terrified that if you let anyone close, they'll do what your mother did. Choose someone else. Leave you behind." The room went silent. Kang Dashik's jaw tightened. "You don't protect people," Elizabeth continued quietly. "You collect them. Keep them close so they can't hurt you. But that's not safety. That's just survival. Loneliness." The word hung in the air. He stood abruptly. "You should rest." "I'm not tired." "Elizabeth, why did you really bring me here?" She stood too. "You could have sent bodyguards, put me in a safe house. But you brought me to your home. Why? Kang Dashuk stared at her, and for the first time, she saw it. The crack in the armor. Because, he said quietly, you're the first person in 10 years who looked at me and didn't flinch. Her breath caught. And that, he added, voice rough, terrifies me more than any bullet. He walked away, but this time, Elizabeth didn't let him. Kang Dashuk. He stopped. My name, she said softly, is Elizabeth. Not liability, not loose thread. If I'm staying in your world, you're going to use my name. He turned, looked at her, really looked. Elizabeth, he said, and it sounded like a promise. Will Elizabeth break through the architect's walls, or will his world swallow her whole? Drop a comment and let me know what you think happens next. Don't forget to subscribe to Christy J's story. Elizabeth woke at 3 a.m. to an empty penthouse. She found him in the room she wasn't supposed to enter. The war room. Blueprints covered every wall. Not buildings, escape routes, back doors, kill zones. Chicago mapped in red ink and paranoia. In the center, a desk. On it, a photograph. A woman, a little girl. Both smiling. Both dead. I told you not to come in here. His voice came from the doorway. Elizabeth didn't turn. You also said I wasn't a prisoner. You're not. Then why hide this? Silence. Then he stepped inside. I was 12 when they came. Elizabeth's breath stopped. My father ran Busan. Untouchable, everyone thought. Until he wasn't. His voice was flat, empty. They killed him at dinner. Made us watch. Me, my mother, my sister. Elizabeth's chest tightened. Then they asked my mother a question. Which child do we take? The air turned ice. She chose my sister, younger, prettier, more valuable. He stared at the photograph. She was wrong. They took us both. Killed my sister in front of me. Kept me because I didn't scream. Elizabeth couldn't breathe. They trained me for 6 years, taught me that control is the only thing that matters, that love, his jaw clenched. Love is just a weapon people use before they destroy you. He finally looked at her. I built this empire so I'd never be 12 again, never powerless, never begging. Elizabeth held his gaze. You're not 12 anymore. No. But you're still building cages. Something cracked in his expression. I don't. You do. She stepped closer. You think if you control everything, nothing can hurt you. But all you've done is lock yourself in. For a moment, just a moment, she saw the boy. 12 years old, watching his sister die. Then the wall rebuilt. Get some sleep, Elizabeth. He turned to leave. Kang Dashuk. He stopped. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me. He didn't respond, but he didn't close the door behind him either, and somehow that meant more. The invitation arrived on black cardstock, gold lettering, no RSVP. The outfit requests your presence. Elizabeth held it up. What is this? Kang Dashuk barely glanced over. A test. For who? Both of us. The gala sparkled at Navy Pier. Chicago's Jewel turned into a den of predators in tuxedos. Elizabeth wore midnight blue. Expensive. Understated. She looked like she belonged. She hated it. Stay close, Kang Dashuk murmured, and don't talk to Marcus Vale. Who? You'll know. She did. Marcus Vale was silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with a smile that could sell poison. He found her within minutes. Elizabeth, the woman who broke the Onyx rule. He handed her champagne. I've been dying to meet you. Nothing good, I hope. He laughed. Kang Dashuk is brilliant, but he's building a dictatorship. He leaned closer. I'm building a democracy. A crime democracy? Why not? Every voice gets a vote, every crew gets a share. No one man holds all the keys. His eyes gleamed. Including you, if you want. I don't. You say that now, but when he locks you in, and he will, call me. He slipped a card into her hand. Heavy, expensive. I pay better than loyalty, Elizabeth. I pay in freedom. She tucked it away. Kang De-shuk appeared at her side. Vale. Architect? Marcus smiled wider. Just discussing philosophy. I'm sure. Kang De-shuk's hand found her back. Possessive. We're leaving. So soon? Yes. Marcus Vale's smile never wavered. Think about it, Elizabeth. Freedom is always an option. In the car, silence stretched. Then, what did he offer you? Kang De-shuk asked. Does it matter? Yes. Elizabeth looked at him. He offered me a way out. And I'm still here. His hand found hers in the dark. He didn't let go the whole way home. Elizabeth disappeared on a Tuesday. No struggle, no scream, just gone. Kang De-shuk found the note on her pillow. 3 words. Testing your locks. He destroyed his office in under a minute. Desk overturned, glass shattered, rage like a living thing, because he knew. She hadn't been taken. She'd left. Elizabeth sat across from Marcus Vale in a warehouse that smelled like money and ambition. 48 hours, she said. That's all you get. To convince you? To show me you're different. Vale smiled. Deal. He showed her everything. Profit-sharing ledgers, democratic votes, families protected, not exploited. It was functional, efficient, safe, and it made her sick. You don't like it, Vale observed on the second day. I don't trust it. Why not? Because you're selling freedom like it's a product. Elizabeth stood. Kang De-shuk doesn't promise safety, but at least he's honest about the cage. And that's better? No, she met his eyes. But it's real. Vale leaned back. You're going back to him. I am. Why? Because he doesn't pretend I have choices. He just... She paused. He lets me make them anyway. She walked into the penthouse at midnight. Kang De-shuk stood by the window, back rigid, hands shaking. You left, he said, voice breaking. I came back. Why? She stepped closer. Because Vale offers freedom in a pretty box, but you offer something harder. What? The chance to earn it. He turned. His eyes were red. I thought, I know. She touched his face. I'm sorry. Don't do that again. I won't. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. And for the first time since he was 12, Kang De-shuk let himself break. Elizabeth made her choice, but the cost is just beginning. If you're hooked, smash that subscribe button for Christy J. Story. Chapter 7 drops soon, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The call came at 4 a.m. Marcus, her brother. Liz, his voice shook. I'm sorry. They said they'd kill me if I didn't. The line went dead. Elizabeth's blood turned to ice. Kang De-shuk was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders. Where? Elizabeth demanded. South side, the old shipyard. He grabbed his jacket. You're staying here. Like hell I am. Elizabeth, that's my brother. Their eyes locked. He didn't argue. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusted metal and broken dreams. Marcus knelt in the center, hands bound, blood trickling from his temple. Vale's men surrounded him. 20 guns, 1 hostage. Elizabeth, Marcus screamed when he saw her. Don't! A gun pressed to his head silenced him. Vale stepped from the shadows. I gave you a choice, he said calmly. You chose wrong. Let him go, Elizabeth said. This is between us. No, this is a lesson, Vale smiled. About the cost of loyalty. Kangdashik's voice cut through the dark. You wanted a war, Vale. Congratulations. Gunfire exploded. Elizabeth hit the ground, crawling toward Marcus as bullets screamed overhead. She reached him, cutting his bonds with shaking hands. Run, she hissed. Not without you. Run! He ran. She didn't. Elizabeth stood, facing Vale as the battle raged. You think you've won? Vale asked. No. Elizabeth's voice was steady. But I think you've lost. Behind him, Kangdashik appeared, silent, lethal. The architect didn't speak. He didn't need to. Vale's empire crumbled that night. Later, in the penthouse, Elizabeth found Kangdashik on the balcony. You saved him, she said softly. I saved you. She stepped beside him. Thank you. He didn't look at her. Next time you tell me to run, I'm listening. She almost smiled. Deal. 1 week after the shipyard, Kangdashik placed an envelope on the table. Open it, he said. Inside, a deed, a bank statement, a plane ticket. Elizabeth stared. What is this? A house in your name? Money? An exit? His voice was quiet. You're free, Elizabeth. No strings. Her hands trembled. You're letting me go? I'm giving you a choice. Silence filled the room. Then Elizabeth laughed, bitter, broken. You think I want this? I think you deserve it. What I deserve, she said, voice shaking, is to stop being treated like I'll break. She pushed the envelope back. I want 3 things. Kangdashik waited. 1. My brother walks away, clean. You never touch him, never use him, never mention him. Done. 2. I see the books. Every deal, every body, every lie. No secrets. Agreed. 3. Her voice cracked. I need you to understand that if I stay, I'm not yours. I'm mine. And the day you forget that, I disappear. Not because you'll let me, because you won't be able to stop me. Kangdashik's jaw clenched. That's not a negotiation. That's a threat. No, Elizabeth said. It's a promise. He stared at her. Then, slowly, he knelt. Stay, he whispered. Not as mine, as my equal. Elizabeth's breath caught. This isn't love, she said. No, he looked up. It's a merger. She pulled him to his feet. Then let's rewrite the contract. But that night, her brother came. Marcus stood in the doorway, eyes cold. You became one of them, he said. I became me. Mom would be ashamed. The words cut deeper than any bullet. Get out, Elizabeth whispered. Liz, get out. He left. Didn't look back. Later, Kangdashik found her on the balcony, tears streaming. He'll come back, he said quietly. Maybe, but he'll never see me the same. She wiped her eyes. That's the price, isn't it? You can't rewrite the throne without burning the bridges behind you. He said nothing, because they both knew she was right. Elizabeth paid the cost. But what throne is she building? Hit that like button and subscribe to Christy J's story for the final chapter. You won't believe how this ends. The Onyx vault looked the same. Velvet booths, crystal chandeliers, predators in expensive suits. But everything had changed. Elizabeth sat in booth 1. The crews called her the Silhouette, the woman who rewrote Chicago without raising her voice. Profit sharing, Fair votes. Protection, not exploitation. She'd kept the throne. She'd just redesigned it. Kang Dashik stood behind her, hand on her shoulder. Not possessive. Protective. A new waitress approached, young, black, terrified. "Booth 1, the girl stammered. Should I? Elizabeth smiled. "Look me in the eye when you serve me. Always." The girl blinked. "But the rule—" "I am the rule now." The waitress nodded, hands shaking, and poured the wine. When she left, Kang Dashik leaned down. "You're kinder than I was." "I'm not kind," Elizabeth said. "I'm teaching her what my mother taught me." "What's that?" She looked up at him, this man who'd tried to cage her, then knelt instead. "How to be so quiet? Predators forget your prey." She paused. "Until the day you're not." The city glittered below them. Chicago. Beautiful. Brutal. Hers. Elizabeth raised her glass. "To new rules," she said. Kang Dashik raised his. "To the woman who wrote them." They drank. And in booth 1, where fear used to reign, a new empire was born. That's the end of Invisible. If this story grabbed you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Christy J. Story. Drop a comment telling me what you thought of Elizabeth's journey, and if you want more stories like this, let me know. Thanks for listening. This has been Christy J. Story.